It's remarkable to me how much is changing, um, even just in a sort of a few moments practice like we just did. So we practiced for around about 3 minutes, and you noticed all of these different changes happening. And I wonder how many of those changes that you noticed during that 3 or 4 minute practice wouldn't have been noticed if you weren't consciously paying attention to them. So it's very easy for us to kind of go through our day and just be me, and kind of and to um, intuit me as a sort of static, fixed entity um, that basically stays the same. And yet, when we really pay attention, we see just how the flow of experience is continually in flux. In fact, it's sort of an irony that the only thing it seems that we can say is constant is change. And things are constantly changing. It seems to be a kind of, so far anyway, inexorable law of nature. Um, it's that's just the way it is. Things change. But there are lots of reasons why perhaps we don't acknowledge this. We'll maybe come to those in a moment. But I'm just reflecting on it's the start of the growing season, as gardeners amongst you will be aware. And so, I've been down to our allotment, and I was reflecting yesterday on how, in some ways, the allotment that I tend, I'm not going to say my allotment, but the allotment that I tend is actually, has become one of my greatest teachers in the last few years, because it's continually changing, and there's a rhythm and a flow to the changes that I don't control, but I can tend. I can influence depending on what I plant where and when, and how well I look after it, and how patient I am in terms of waiting for things to grow. All of these are kind of influences I can make, but the process of change is already in motion constantly, and there's a rhythm and a flow with the seasons and the changes in weather and the growing and the dying and the planting, and then the decomposing. They're all kind of natural processes that are happening right in front of me, and these processes are happening all over, right in front of us. So it's kind of it's in a funny way, it's strange that change is everywhere, completely unavoidable, and yet we can cling so hard to constants, what we like to think of as constants, and the sense of expectation that basically things are staying the same. And by that I mean, for example, that you come on screen once a month and you see me, and I'm imagining you expect me to be much the same as I was last month. And yet, of course, I'm different. I've got a whole month of being older, and a whole month of experience that I didn't have a month ago. That inevitably must be changing me. And you're all the same. And yet, when we kind of, we kind of can fix on these names that we have, like that's Ed, and that's John, and that's Mike, and that's that's Shirley, and I'm not using your real names, by the way, because I might put this on YouTube. So not to look for all those people. But your you-ness is actually shifted in that time. And again, when we actually pay attention to that, it's obvious. But we go about our days, many of us, I would imagine, as if that's not the case, as if there's a kind of a fixed entity that's me and fixed entity that's you, and we'll be the same basically when we meet each time. And that makes things a lot easier, of course. If we can rely on life staying the same, then it's going to save a whole lot of effort, because every time something changes, we've got to readjust to the change. Much of the last year has been, kind of seeing this play out in much kind of greater, greater powered microscope than we might usually experience it, because we have been faced with such large and frequent shifts in our lives. But there's quite a lot of investment in actually this not being the case, such as it takes us effort to readjust. It takes brain power every time that something is different than what we expect it to be, and our brains work with a kind of a shortcutting capacity where if things are what we expect them to be, then less brain power is used, and we can be on automatic pilot, which is why it's hard when we first start, for example, driving a car. Do you remember your first driving lesson? Those of you who drive, it's like, whoa, what the? At least, before the days of automatics and so on. So much to be attended to, and it's overwhelming, and you have to go really slowly. But then it's not that long before it becomes automatic. We become automatic rather than the car. It kind of just becomes a pattern. And I imagine some of you would be familiar with the experience of really driving on automatic pilot, where you kind of lose touch with where you're going, and you might even end up in some place that you didn't, for example, driving to a friend's house and ending up taking your route to work because that's the route you normally take. I'm seeing a few heads nodding. This kind of thing has been done. Or we missed turning on the motorway because we're up in our heads, because our brain has gone on to automatic. So when things are what we expect them to be, then that saves us energy. It also saves us anxiety, because it's uncomfortable to face change. So because we get into these patterns of following the same path, when something actually jars with that, it's uncomfortable. It kind of activates our threat systems, which says, hey, hang on a minute, this is not what I expected it to be. Maybe there's a problem here. Maybe I've got something to worry about. And again, it's a good survival mechanism, because in the past, if the coast was not clear, i.e. there was something coming up that was unexpected, unfamiliar, then that could well be a predator who's coming to get us. So we are wired to experience anxiety when there's change. So we've got the increased effort that's required, and the increased active anxiety that comes with experiences of change. So there's kind of a problem here, in that, of course, there is change. In fact, continually there is change. So what does our mind-brain do with this problem? Well, it kind of mostly pretends that what's actually happening is not happening, and that saves us the anxiety and the effort. So we end up in a situation of kind of a denial or ignorance, or pretending even, or just not paying attention to what's really going on. And that saves us a lot of anxiety and a lot of effort, but it means that we're not actually really in touch with what's going on in reality. So there's a cost as well as a benefit to that reaction. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is a courageous step, which is to actually acknowledge, first of all, to acknowledge change, to recognize that it's really here. And then that kind of puts us more in touch with reality. It might also put us more in touch with our anxiety and a sense of whew, this could be hard work. But it does get us in touch with reality. And maybe it also does save us some energy as well, because if we're resisting change, for example, which is another strategy that comes up as well as pretending it isn't there, resisting it, also takes up energy. So we might also be freeing up energy as well as using it. The second step after acknowledging is actually accepting change. So can we actually see, yep, this is how things are, and I'm okay with that. And that's a much harder step than just acknowledging it, because saying I'm okay with it means recognizing that we are constantly changing, that the things that we have, we won't have, and be willing not to know what's around the corner. It means being willing to acknowledge that, in 100 years' time, none of us will be here, most likely. There may be one or two who are young enough to possibly survive that long. I don't know. But, recognizing that kind of if we accept our own permanence, that requires a certain degree of willingness to tolerate uncertainty. There's a third step, which is if we can accept it, can we actually start to approach it? So can we, once we've kind of got to the stage of, almost like the sort of grief stage of going, yes, this is how it is, not to just to stay there, but to actually say, and let's go with this. Let's actually move into what's called our approach mode, which is a mode of curiosity, willingness to engage. And then we actually become like the gardeners of our own lives. So we kind of say, okay, well, I'll work with the seasons. I'll work with the changes in weather. I'll work with the being born and the dying and the living. I'll influence where I can and also accept what I can't influence. I'll actually become in tune and attuned to how things are. So now we're actually starting to engage rather than being in a place of denial or even just acknowledging. And then the final step is can we even move into play with change? Can we actually start to enjoy the seasons of our lives and the experiences of difference and kind of actually dance in it? And there's a quote that I really love that I'll read to you, which sort of describes this a little bit. It's by Henry Miller. And he said this: the art of living is based on rhythm, on give and take, ebb and flow, light and dark, life and death. By acceptance of all aspects of life, good and bad, right and wrong, yours and mine, the static defensive life, which is what most people are cursed with, is converted into a dance, the dance of life, metamorphosis. So I love that, this view of if we can be, and this is called, the art of living. If we can transform ourselves into dancing with the changes, the ones we want, and of course, much more difficult, the ones we don't want, then actually that in itself is transformative. That is the metamorphosis that can, well, in my experience, and others that I've heard from too, can really transform our experience of life from, this phrase that Henry Miller uses, the static defensive life. The great phrase, the static defensive life, because it implies it's actually I never remember which one's an oxymoron or which one's a tautology, but you can't actually have a static life. Yeah, and so it becomes defensive, that trying to hold on to stasis. And yet when we actually let go of that, change is accepted, yeah, and gets to be the possibility of being a dance. So this is a process, of course. It's not something we can just decide. It's actually something that we have to practice living, like dancing. Like if you want to learn a dance, you've got to actually take some dance lessons. So mindfulness training are the kind of, in my experience and opinion, is a great training in learning to be with the flow. Well, learning to actually, first of all, see the flow, because we're look at all those changes that you noticed during that first practice. So that's there. As soon as we look, we see it. Secondly, to learn to be with it, to actually learn how to surf, to ride the waves of shifting sands of experience. And then the third step, actually, can we learn to befriend it, which is that third step of approach. And of course, when we take this out into our lives, we are then, if we're able to embody this, we're playing with it. Now, likelihood is none of us are able to do this fully, but maybe it's a worthwhile intention to become more and more free in this capacity and willingness to play with the changes, which seems to be an aspect of life that we are presented with as a fait accompli. So, of course, anxiety may still arise. So this isn't kind of a cure for anxiety, nor is it a cure for the effort that's required to meet changes. But perhaps it's a chance of holding it and being with it and living it differently.